348 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Podcast Network. I'm Steve, filling in for James this week, and we have Ryan and Spencer both on the mic. How you guys doing this weekend?
Doing well. Had been a busy weekend with a lot of preparing for fall ball starting for all my coaching stuff, but otherwise a lot of baseball, which is always good. So, yeah.
You don't get a weekend off for celebrating Labor Day or anything like that?
Oh, no.
Business?
We've got about 7 hours of practice tomorrow, so Labor Day is not a day off for me.
So do you have to start like once? Is it officially like September? It turns the calendar and then you can start doing fall ball?
Yeah, you get a certain amount of days over the course of the year. We just use September as kind of the gauge because it's decent weather. Technically, you could go into October or start in August, but everyone's just getting back to school now, so it doesn't really make sense to have them come in early. So it's mostly just September, and then we get a couple of like mini camps is what we call them at the end of October and November that will be indoors, but just to kind of check in with everyone.
So do you play like a game schedule at all?
You can only, at the D3 level, you can only have one outside competition in fall. So we will play Bryant and Stratton, the junior college, and on a weekend, and then we play a bunch of inter squad stuff on other weekends.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, especially now with the way falls have been here in Wisconsin, like you can get a lot. It's better than playing spring. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So we did some home improvement projects yesterday and it turned out nicely. We have a new shower head upstairs, which is great. Fantastic. So
Great.
Did that. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you got tickets for the Jackson Churio bobblehead.
No, I don't believe we do because those go really quickly in my season ticket group.
Like I said, I was looking online earlier this week, and those things are picked over. Like you can get expensive tickets and stuff like that, but if you just want to like get in the door to try to get that bobblehead, like good luck. It's really tough.
I have a feeling you're going to need to be there hours early to make sure that you get one for that. We're looking at Spencer's collection of bobbleheads right behind him right now. It's in his office in the background here. Do you still do that? Because those look like there's some older ones, which is mostly what I have is older ones.
Yeah, I get most of the new ones, but I don't go to the games to get them. Luckily, I have enough people who do and are willing to just give them to me because they don't collect them. So that's kind of how I get them these days. But once in a while I'll go. I don't make it a plan in my schedule very often anymore.
Yeah. My son is 11, so I'll gently nudge him to players to kind of make his favorite for the team. And obviously Churio has been like, yeah, hey, you should like Jackson Churio because A, he's been playing great, and B, we know we're probably going to have him for what at this point, at least 8 seasons, if not 12.
No, it goes through 10. It can be up to 10 seasons with the 2 options. They could trade him at some point in there, depending on what how things go. But you never know how that's going to work out. But yeah, Jackson Churio is going to be around for a good long while.
I'm like, if we got to invest in player jerseys and stuff like that, let's make sure it's going to last a couple seasons.
Yeah, I think you're safe on investing in a Jackson Churio jersey. I have a feeling your 11-year-old is going to outgrow it long before Jackson Churio is no longer on that team.
That one I'm planning. We already did that. We bought a Churio shirt at AmFam a couple weeks ago. He got that one. And I'm like, yeah, you'll outgrow this one. We'll have to replace it at some point at least.
Is that because I picked up the Giannis jersey, the Giannis Brewers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That one still fits?
That one's, well, now he's actually growing into it compared to when you got it.
Right. It was too big for him before. Yeah. All right.
Well, it looked like he should have been playing drums for Fish with the way that one fit.
All right, this is scintillating stuff for everybody, I'm sure, but should we actually get into the podcast and talk Brewers?
I am sure there are a lot of Brewers fans out there that need to make plans for Jackson Churio bobbleheads.
That is true. That's true.
So, but hey, you can become a patron at patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and reporting is eligible, which is swinging into full swing.
They had their first podcast this last week with Matub, JR, and Paul in a long time because JR has been out quite a bit doing stuff for the JS.
Yeah, and Matub, I don't know,
was also out.
Deals with his cheeses in the Midwest or whatever it is.
He's traveling around to the Yeah, the Plains. I think those are the Great Plains.
Great
Steve.
Plains.
Yeah, those are
Great
the
Plains. Great Plains cheeses.
Yeah, we're the Midwest. They're the Great Plains.
Yeah.
We got to keep that straight. People get really, really up in their feelings about that.
Yeah, so make sure you join that. And again, reporting is eligible. Those questions pile up quick. So that one, if you want to get on, like you're really going to need that subscription there. So $5 a month gets you that question priority, plus additional exclusive content, including the Minor League Extra with both Ryan and Spencer, who have a new episode.
Yeah, just went out on Friday. We did our top. Well, we set off to do 10, and we talked about 12 in quite a bit of depth, and then we also gave our next 8. So we really did top 20s here, because you kind of have to with the system right now this way, right, Spencer?
Yeah, it's the strength of the system is the depth, so we wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so subscribe for that. And then also you have the reporting is eligible mini pods, which are coming out every week at this point as well. So if you want to get your insider info on the upcoming Packers games, make sure to subscribe for that. You can support us in other ways by going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast and give us a 5-star review. And I recommend everybody do that.
It's been a while. We need to get some of the last review is good, but there were some nasty people a few reviews before that, so we need to keep shoving them down the queue.
It's Bears fans that caught Paul on Twitter, and so they went to go review bomb.
Yeah, they're just some very terrible people.
So go there, give your 5-star reviews. Paul will read whatever you write if it's 5 stars. Just remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're there, be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button to make sure you never miss an episode. Okay, it was an excellent week for the crew, first taking 2 of 3 from the Giants on a quick homestand before heading to Cincy to take 3 of 4 before dropping Sunday's game, which Ryan wrote in this intro before the game was finished.
Dude, I wrote it in like the 3rd inning.
You did.
Yeah, I wrote it in the 3rd inning, and it wasn't because I thought they were going to lose. This was a reverse jinx attempt, and it didn't work. So it ended up just like being a self-fulfilling prophecy instead. I tried to the reverse jinx, and it didn't work, so can't do that anymore. But.
Well, as we were talking about, Devin Williams threw 50 pitches in like 2 days or whatever it was. So
we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to it. But they did it with pitching, throwing a pair of shutouts, and also with the bats, averaging 6 runs per game for the week. Depending on what the Cubs do, they'll head into the series with the Cardinals on Monday, at worst with a 9-game lead in the Central. Okay, Spencer, we'll start with you on this. What's your level of confidence they'll take care of business and win the Central at this point?
Very high, super high. I mean, as close to 100% as I can be without saying 100%. So I'll go 99%. I would be pretty surprised at this point. It would be one of the, if not the worst collapse in baseball history to lose this big of a lead this late in the season. So I won't rule it out, but I will come as close to doing that as I can.
Yeah, Pacoda currently has them at 99.4. Well, that was before today. And it looks like the Cubs are going to win, right? They were up 6-1 last week.
6-1,
yeah. So they were 99.4% to win the division coming into today. So, yeah, I think it's pretty safe that they're going to win the division. But I do get paranoid about it. I still get paranoid. And the Craig thing does make me nervous. That I'm way more I'm not actually nervous about this, but if this thing gets down to like 5 or 6 games, then I'm going to start getting a little nervous.
Well, I mean, like we were talking about earlier, the Cubs have been on a heater, and they've basically gained no games in a week. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to keep up this level of play to start making some kind of progress against the Brewers. They haven't been able to do it at this point. So.
Yeah, and the Brewers can absolutely put a stake through the heart of the Cardinals. I mean, they're 11 back or 12 back, depending on what they did with the Yankees today. But they're even further back than the Cubs, and the Brewers play them coming up here. Their last series against the Cardinals coming up. If they win that series. Basically, as long as they don't get swept by the Cardinals, they could basically put the Cardinals to bed here. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to remember is they did take the Brewers took the season series from the Cubs, so a tie means the Cubs are still in second without a playoff.
That is true.
So I think the Cubs had maybe 4 games. If the Brewers play 500, the Cubs had about 4 games they could lose in September and possibly catch them. So I get the paranoia, but when you look at it realistically, it would be very difficult for that to happen.
It's irrational paranoia. I get it.
They already had a
it's
hot
little-
Krogist, so there's no Craig Timber. Okay, let's jump into the Patreon questions. Baseball needs more chest lettuce. What are your thoughts on the first round bye? So I assume this is thoughts on the Brewers potentially getting a first round bye. Ryan, what do you think? What are the chances of that?
I'm going to say the chances of that are 25.7%. That is the current, or was coming into today, the Fangraphs odds for them clinching a bye. Actually, I think it's a little bit better than that because honestly, they were coming into today 80-57, and the Phillies were 80-56, and so basically even. I think they have a legitimate chance there. The Brewers' schedule, I don't know how bad the Phillies' schedule is down the stretch, but the Brewers' schedule down the stretch it's kind of a sampling platter. I am a bit worried about the Diamondbacks because we have 7 games left against the Diamondbacks, and that's sort of the most concerning thing on there. But they have other series, and they also still have a series against the Phillies. So if they go in and like take care of business against the Phillies, that's good. But the Phillies will, because of. So the way the tiebreaker works is the Brewers would have to sweep the Phillies to get to an even tiebreaker. And if they did that, you feel like they'd have a pretty good chance to just straight up finish ahead of the Phillies anyway. So I don't know. We talked about this a bunch last week, but I think it's actually a little bit better than the 25.7. Give me, I don't know, like a 40% chance of them getting a bye at this point. I don't think they're going to get past the Dodgers. The Dodgers seem to be now sort of clicking offensively on all cylinders. So I think the Dodgers are going to be ahead of us. But I think they can catch the Phillies. It's possible.
Yeah, I agree. I do think just generally now that the first round bye matters a lot. I mean, I would like to have it. Any possibility to avoid that 3-game series, I would prefer. But it's going to be tough because of that sweep earlier in the season from the Phillies. They are going to hold that tiebreaker, barring a sweep from the Brewers in September. So I would be around 35-40% as well. I don't feel super confident that they'll do it, but I definitely think it's possible.
Yeah.
I guess how hard do you think they should manage to get that first round bye? Like if you're Murphy and you're making calls daily for the lineup and how you're handling the pitching staff, like, do you handle this like it used to be trying to get into the playoffs? Like you would go all out to win every game?
No, you don't. You definitely do not do that. But I think you have to manage to it somewhat, especially if it's close in that last weekend. I think it does change especially some pitching decisions for you. I think you don't necessarily throw out like a very weak starter. You don't do something like that. And you maybe manage a little bit differently down the very end game of the season. But I think right now, you probably want to treat it like you have this big lead that you do, and you're trying to win games, but you're not necessarily like they clearly had Devin Williams off limits today. They weren't going to go to him, and I think that's good. That's the smart thing you do. He had pitched 2 days in a row. You're not going to pitch him that 3rd day in a row, especially considering the number of pitches he'd been throwing. So things like that, you are still going to be cautious about stuff like that. But yeah, that last weekend, if it's close, you're definitely gonna do what you can to try to make it happen, right?
Yeah, I think the main thing is you won't see, or you probably shouldn't see them like skipping starts to try and set up the playoff rotation, things like that. Like I think they would just keep it the way it's going and try and win those games as best they can. But again, I still wouldn't want them going and throwing Devin 3 games in a row to try and squeak that out, because if you don't get it, then you're in a really tough spot heading into that wild card series where it is 2 out of 3. So you do have to balance it a little bit, but I think if it's close enough, yeah, you're still throwing Freddie on normal rest. You're still throwing Ray and Myers and all of those guys on normal rest rather than maybe trying to set up however you want to do it in a playoff series.
Yeah, and it's probably more the difference between like giving a guy extra rest or throwing him on normal rest than it is you're not going to go short rest for any of it. I don't think at this point, yeah, you're not running Freddie out there on 3 days rest. Like that's not going to happen.
How are we feeling about Murphy at this point in the season? We got a month left. You know, we definitely have a lot of season data on how he manages. I know there have been times where like Williams is getting a lot of work. Ryan and I were talking earlier about like a lot of these starters at this point are trying to cover at least 6 innings, which earlier in the season isn't a thing that happens. It seems like the team is pretty aggressive running. And I don't know, especially once you get a guy on third, I feel like they're not immune from running themselves into outs quite a bit. And that might be a Murphy aggressiveness thing. I mean, how do we feel about him? Spencer, how do you feel about Murphy at this point? Do you think he's similar to what Counsell would be doing, or is he starting to put his own stamp on this team?
I think it's more similar than I think a lot of fans believe. But I do think he's more aggressive in terms of base running, though I also think Craig probably would have been with this roster and with the new rules and just adjusting anyway. I don't think it would have been too much different. He did like to run. The one thing I don't like, I do think Murph is more bunt happy, which I don't love. For hits is fine. It still can be too much of that at times though too. I don't need Chourio ever squaring to bunt for a hit right now. There's no reason for that. And he's gotten out 3 times in this month doing that. Like there's no point in that. He's smoking the ball, let him hit. And even if you're not telling him to bunt, make it clear that he probably shouldn't be bunting and tell him to go swing the bat. But it's a good mix. I think pen decisions have gotten a lot better as the season went on. I thought he was a little bit too aggressive in terms of using his A pen and refusing to use his B pen earlier in the year. And I think that's gotten a lot better as the year went on. Today's game was a good example. Bryce Wilson was the guy who should have been pitching those last 4 innings or so, and he did. So I was happy he didn't try to force a McGill or a Piamps or anyone into that who have been used a lot recently. McGill was up and getting hot last night, so I think he was unavailable because of that. So I think he's improved a lot as the season went on, and I do think he's a good manager. I was pretty weary of the hire when they made it, and I do think he's done a good job.
Yeah, the guys clearly like to play for him. There is that, and that's always going to be one of the top things. And he's had it kind of easy because they started hot and they never really went through a long extended stretch, and that is to his credit somewhat, but also he hasn't really been tested. He hasn't had that really, really tough thing. Though I guess you could say the amount of injuries they've had this year has been a test for him. And I think he's come out of it well. And the management of the pitching staff has been good. Even at its worst, it wasn't like he was totally like awful out there. It was just there were some things that needed to get cleaned up. Like you said, he was overusing some guys. Brian Hudson got really overused early. But like some of that was just they didn't realize how good he was going to be. And so they kind of had to adjust on the fly and go, well, okay, this guy's actually more part of our A bullpen, so we need to back off of him some. And they started doing that, and they started instituting rules relatively early. We talked about the fact that he didn't pitch on back-to-back days after like April, it was like 15th, and he was getting at least 2 days rest after May 15th. So they clearly they had a plan in place there. They had something that they were doing. And that's at least partially him. It's probably also the front office. I think a lot of this is not Murphy. It's the front office as a whole. It's all of the people involved. So you have to take that into account too. But yeah, this has been crazy, and everybody's talking about him as the manager of the year. And it's going to be, if that happens, just right into my veins. Will be so satisfying to have that happen. Hopefully we will find that out after the Brewers win a World Series. And then we can really, really enjoy all of that perfectly. But that would be super satisfying.
Well, again, manager of the year takes a bit of a narrative, and taking over for another guy gives you that narrative. So that's what Craig never had in Milwaukee.
Well, and it's also just like, what was the expectation? It's basically which team was the furthest over, like what Vegas and Pacoda were thinking their win total would be going into the season. That's the manager of the year. It pretty much works that way every single year. And Craig could he was always close, but he could never quite get over the hump. He always had somebody else with a slightly better narrative than him, which is hilarious considering how many of those people have now been fired.
Well, I'm trying to think. Were the Brewers favorites in the division? It was all really tight this year, wasn't it? Where the previous years
they were like 77 wins, and the Cardinals and Cubs were both firmly into the 80s.
Okay. Well,
yeah, there were people thinking the Brewers were like the 4th place team in this division. Yeah.
There you go. Suck it, nerds.
Well, and gamblers.
And gamblers. There you go.
Nerds and gamblers.
Okay, Spencer mentioned Churio stinging the ball earlier, and Brugene Debs asked, "Does Churio get a 2020 at 20 this year?" Spencer, what do you think the chances are that? What's he need? 3 more home runs, I think, at this
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance of it as long as he's healthy and playing. I would be, I guess, maybe more surprised if he doesn't than if he does at this point. So it's pretty incredible. He'll be if he does it, he'll be the youngest player to ever do it. So it's pretty impressive. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, he has just been everything we could have hoped for this year, and so much more. This is not reasonable what he's doing. The expectation of this is he is so much better than what we should have expected, and it's glorious. It's so much fun to watch, and he is a lot. And you could see him just growing in confidence and feeling a lot better about where he's at and all of that. It's really quite impressive.
Okay, Michael Parr asks, "I'm looking for some optimism," which I mean,
Yeah,
they're up by
the
like
standings.
they're up by like 9 games with a month to go. But if you need more, do the Brewers still have some room for growth this year, particularly with their young players? It seems as if Terang, Mitchell, Frelick, and Ortiz are showing signs of working on their weaknesses, not to mention Churio. So I guess overall, I mean, obviously we've talked about Churio to death, his age, his kind of production, but of those other guys, I guess who gives you a little bit of hope going into the future of like, yeah, these are also cornerstones that we're going to have to build upon.
I do. Well, Ortiz for me is the one that I have the most belief in moving forward of those 4. I think once he moves to short, and we have some questions about his defense, so I won't touch on it too much, but I think he's going to be a very good defensive shortstop. And we've already seen what the bat is capable of at times. He had the neck injury. He has not hit well since then. He had like a good 2-week stretch a few weeks back, but it hasn't been great. But he shows an ability to hit the ball to all fields with some pop. Line drive guy. He can take walks. He doesn't strike out a ton, although that's been going up as the season goes on. But I just think he's going to be at a premium position and adding all of that. And then I think Terang's probably your second baseman for a while. So he's going to be solid. He's actually been hitting better again lately. So that's been good to see. And Mitchell and Frelick are just wild cards for me. There's definitely room for them to grow. And I will say everyone worries about, playoffs, who's going to be in the lineup. A guy like Alec Thomas for the Diamondbacks went crazy in the playoffs last year. Like all it takes is one of Mitchell or Frelick having a nice run in them for 3 series. And all of a sudden that lineup looks head or top to bottom really good. So they're both capable of that. So I do think there's room for growth still, but I think for the most part, you're seeing what this team is. It's September. We've seen 130 some games now. This is what the Brewers are. There just might be a little bit more of a ceiling if they get hot, like every team.
Yeah, Frelick strikes me as a guy who definitely could get hot, and just he has that ability when he's like making good contact to all fields, and he's been better lately. He had a pretty good series in Cincinnati. When you get him on a run like that, there's still not a ton of power in the bat, and that's a problem and a concern. But you could potentially that could get better. You and Jack talked about it on this week's Brew Fanatic pod about the fact that there's sort of this question of can he hit the ball harder, because he was hitting the ball harder in AAA last year. And so I don't want to rehash that. You can go listen to that if you want, but there is kind of a question there that he has hit the ball harder in the past. Whether or not he can do that against big league pitching the same way, that's an open question we need to see.
I want to see Frelick go like full Eckstein in the playoffs and just be so annoying to every team he plays.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if somebody's going full Eckstein in the playoffs, like Terang would be a good candidate
either
for
of
that.
those guys.
Yeah.
The Brewers actually have a few guys that could potentially do that, which would be interesting to see in the playoffs. That's why, there could be holes in the lineup. But again, when you start talking short series and playoff runs, like, I don't know. Again, we've talked about gimmicky hitters in the past, but that stuff can, break out in the playoffs and then totally skew your expectations for them the next year. But It'll be interesting to see if they can kind of harness some of that. We do have a couple questions. They're from Tricky Henderson and Jason G, both stumping for Joey Ortiz as the best defensive third baseman in the league this year and whether or not he should get a Gold Glove. I guess, Spencer, what do you think of Ortiz's third base defense so far? Is he the best in the league? And then you kind of mentioned shortstop going forward. Like, is it clearly just a holding pattern for him at the moment because he has so much more potential in the middle of the diamond?
Yeah, I think they just aren't going to move Willie off of short. I mean, I would bet if Ortiz was the shortstop this year, he'd probably have better defensive metrics than what Willie has put up because it's been a pretty big downturn for Willie on the defensive side of the ball. The offense is a different story. But yeah, I mean, it's hard on the Gold Glove in the NL, which that's who he's fighting with. All of the good defensive third basemen seem to be in the NL this year. I was looking at it earlier. Arenado, Matt Chapman. Chapman's having he had a little bit of a downturn in Toronto, but he's been really good defensively this year. I'm missing one name, but either way, Ortiz's ranks are he's first in MLB for third baseman for outs above average at 8. He's fourth for defensive runs saved at 6 for the season. And then in deserved runs prevented, the Baseball Prospectus one, he is at 2.5, which is tied for 7th in MLB for third baseman. So whether he's the best is a bit up for debate, but he's very much in like the top 5, I think, pretty easily. And he's very good defensively. And I do think people have overlooked that a little bit, not on the Brewers side, but I don't know that it gets much attention outside of the Brewers, just how good he's been over there. I think there's a decent chance he's in the finalists for Gold Glove. I would be a little surprised if he gets more votes than the big names and the guys who've won him so many times in Arenado and Chapman, who are just going to have that name value that voters tend to love in these types of awards.
Yeah, and that's the thing is Nolan Arenado gets to just win Gold Gloves until he like I don't know is dead. He'll be getting him 5 years after he retires probably, just because that's how this stuff. Even at this point, where it being better than it used to be, it still kind of works that way. Though Arenado's offense taking a downtick could potentially hurt him in the Gold Glove standings, which is always a stupid thing to have to say, but it's a reality too. So that's also gotten better too. That is not, now that we have really good defensive stats, I think the Gold Gloves are a lot better than they used to be, but there's still some, not idealness there, but really, yeah, Joey Ortiz is a good defensive shortstop playing third base. So you'd expect him to be a really, really good third baseman. You would that's part of the deal. You would expect him to do that. And he has been. So yeah, it's wonderful.
I mean, looking forward, do we think it's Ortiz's move to shortstop, assuming that Willie takes a contract elsewhere in the offseason, or does Terang have a shot to slide over from second?
No, it's Ortiz because Ortiz has the arm, and Terang's arm is not. It's not really ideal for shortstop. He could play there, but it's not what you want in a shortstop.
Yep. Agreed. Terang's probably like the backup over there next season, but I would imagine it's Ortiz as the full-time guy.
Yeah, I would imagine they probably bring in somebody. We were talking about this a little bit on the minor league pod. Somebody asked us, do you think there's going to be a new third baseman next year who's not on the roster, or can somebody within? And we were talking about Oliver Dunn as a guy potentially, but I think they're definitely bringing somebody in from outside the organization. It's just a question of, is it a sort of a headline guy in terms of like a trade? Like when you trade Devin Williams, could you potentially get a young third baseman? Maybe that could actually happen, but we'll have to see how it shakes out. I don't think they're going to be out there signing a like veteran for third baseman who's like a stud, because that's not how this team is built. That's just not what they do. But they could also sign a veteran who's, maybe coming off of some stuff. Yeah.
They already have Sal Frelick, so you just move him over there.
Oh, yeah, that narrative was a lot of fun.
Okay, the big topic of the week was the bullpen, which posted a 2.25 ERA over the first 6 games of the week, but did have a few hiccups and wasn't always clean, even when keeping runners from actually scoring. So we have a question from Ian Pomplin. Devin Williams seems to be having some issues with control while still making his saves. He also has been closing fairly often. Should he keep going out there to play into form, or does he need more rest, or some third thing? I don't know what the third thing would be. Are we worried about the wheels falling off at some point? I guess, Spencer, is he getting worked a little too hard at this point, or do they have enough time to kind of give him rest?
So there were 2 times where I thought there was really no good reason for him to be available and to be pitching. It was the Cardinals game, which he didn't end up blowing that save, and then the Brewers lost in extra innings. And then yesterday's game when he had the bases loaded and Jake Bauers made the diving play to save him. Both times he was pitching his 3rd day out of 4 and had pretty big pitch counts the day before. So it wasn't just a back-to-back, but it was also 3 out of 4, along with pitch counts over 20 in that day prior. To me, especially, you have Trevor McGill on this roster who's closed the whole season available for both of those. He should just be the one going out there and closing those games. You could make the argument in the playoffs, maybe it's a little different, but I'm not even sure it would be. Devin's never been great in that type of situation when he's being used that much. He is a guy who, even when he's not even when he's got good rest and everything, there's always a chance he's going to work a couple walks into his outing and have some command issues. The way he throws the airbender, it can take some time to find the touch on it during an outing, or you can just lose it for an at-bat. So it's not shocking when these things happen. And I do think people might just be forgetting that this is somewhat how he's been the last couple of years. We just didn't see it most of this season. He does walk people, and he does get himself into trouble at times. So I think he needs more rest. I think they should be a little bit more careful with those 3 out of 4 situations, especially. But I wouldn't be worried about the wheels falling off. Devin Williams is very good with very good stuff, and he is an elite closer. So I wouldn't worry about it that much unless he gets overused to a point where, then he's not healthy.
Yeah. Adam Post asks, this is strictly in a baseball sense, but is Devin Williams transforming into K-Rod? He's putting a lot of runners on base and seemingly taking years off my life with each appearance, even when he doesn't surrender any runs.
Yeah, the 30 pitches of terror thing is starting to pop up for him, which, I mean, it pops up a lot for a lot of relievers because it's kind of part of the deal is you're going to put runners on, and only the very, very best and in prime relievers are just like shut guys down regularly. There's usually going to be some sketchiness. And when Devin still does have good, clean games out there, especially when he's nice and rested. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, one thing I do wonder about is I think they might still be trying to figure out how much they can trust Devin Williams on back-to-back days for the postseason. There may be some like feeling out of how much should we trust him right now and trying to give him the chance, like give him the leash right now to see what his limitations are. Because if you really need to know what those are in October, you're going to want to have him out there closing the 9th inning of back-to-back days. If it makes sense at all, if you can do it, you want to do that. So I guess I see there is some utility in trying that out now and doing that when the stakes aren't nearly as high. But yeah, in general, they need to give him time off. And the fact that he got a full week off there after that Cardinals game, and I know he was having some left shoulder issues, right? It was left shoulder.
Yeah.
That spooked me for a second because I didn't hear that. And then it was like he had a shoulder issue, and it was like, no, it's the left shoulder. BA was the one who freaked me out about that. So, no, you need to specify when it's pitcher, and it's like it's not the pitching shoulder, because who cares then? I mean, it's a little too mean and dismissive, but like the level of concern is completely different when it's a pitcher's pitching shoulder versus when it's their non-pitching shoulder. Those are very different things. So, yeah.
Spencer, you getting more gray hairs from Devin Williams appearances?
Yeah, but like I said, this isn't super new for him. He has always, outside of, the COVID year when he just basically struck out every batter he faced, he's had this in him where he will put some guys on and make it interesting. And it's not usually by the way of hits because he doesn't give up many of those, but he does walk people. He'll hit people. and he will go deep into counts because he's so willing to work from behind. And they do talk about that on the broadcast a lot, which I do agree with. He's a guy who is very comfortable working behind in the count because of that changeup, and it's not something hitters are usually thinking about when they're in a 2-0 count.
Mm-hmm.
But it does also lead to higher pitch counts, even when he has, even some of his clean innings will be like, oh, he threw 17, 18 pitches to get 3 outs, and nobody reached base, but he can still get up there in the pitch count category either way. So he will make things interesting at times, but generally I trust him to get through it pretty much any time. So yeah.
Yeah, he has to be pushed really far and really hard to where he starts to really choke up leads on a consistent basis. So yeah, he's pretty trustworthy that way.
Yeah, it was a little frustrating. I think especially at Cincinnati, he tended to get 0-2 counts, and then he'd let batters work back into it. Yeah. And I think he tends to do that more when he's pitching, frequently. And he's really throwing a lot of pitches. So
yeah, that's the him and Freddie pointing at each other Spider-Man meme right there. Because that's, my God, that's Freddie. If you, Spencer, you guys have cataloged that very, very well over on the other podcast. And yeah, that's taken years off my life.
It is interesting to compare him to like Hader, though, who would be lights out and then all of a sudden become like super hittable.
That was the difference with Hader, is when he was bad, it wasn't because he was walking himself into trouble the way that Williams can. It was because he was giving up dingers to Brian Anderson. Yeah. Like, that always sticks in my mind, was Brian Anderson just pummeling him for a series down in Miami, which, yeah, that's not what you expect. But yeah, he was a guy that he could get hit. His stuff would become randomly hittable, or maybe not so randomly, but he would go through these periods where would become hittable. And it's different than what Devin Williams is. And that's why like the K-Rod comparison here is apt, because K-Rod, in terms of being comfortable working deep into counts and like being willing to, go 3-0 on a guy and then come back and get him. Yeah, that is very reminiscent of K-Rod. Mm-hmm. That and also the similarity of them being changeup guys. So
Spencer, do you have a preference of who you'd rather watch? Would you rather watch a Josh Hader who can smoke through 3 batters and then all of a sudden become a gas can, or Devin Williams who can do the same thing, take down lineups, and then all of a sudden you're watching, a 45-minute bottom half of the 9th inning because he puts everybody on base?
Well, it's not that way anymore because we have pitch timers. So
I am surprised. Well, who was it? France for the Reds was going like 15 pitches deep. Like, those are long at bats. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter what the timer is on it. Like, if you're throwing that many pitches because he keeps fouling it off, it's just a long at bat.
Well, I think the other thing about K-Rod was he was one of those relievers who would take forever in between pitches. He would walk around, he would adjust, and he would get 35, 40 seconds. But he had runners on. You get 35, 40 seconds in between pitches. And so if he was going deep into it, you could have a 5-minute at bat where there's only 7 or 8 pitches thrown. And it's just, the game would grind to a halt. And it was no good for anybody's cardiovascular system.
Yeah. Devin, before the pitch clock, I believe, was, if not the longest time between pitches, he was right up there for relievers. So he was very much in the K-Rod realm when he was allowed to be. But I guess I would prefer watching a Devin Williams over a Hader, because with Hader, there was always just this one thought in your head the whole time, like, this next pitch could tie the game every single time. And I rarely feel that with Devin. He doesn't give up too many home runs. He might give up a single or maybe a double or something, but it always felt like with Hader, in a 1-run game, the next pitch could tie it at any moment, because that was his issue. It was a quick, you could say painless, but it wasn't a quick and painless type of 1-run deficit going, or 1-run lead going away real quickly. So I would still prefer Devin, but neither are very fun when they're not going well. That's for sure.
Well, no reliever is fun when they're, and they all are going to have struggles. Mariano Rivera, I always remember you'd get these runs where Mariano Rivera would struggle for a couple weeks, and Yankees fans would be beside themselves. And it's like, you have the greatest relief pitcher in the history of the game, and it's going to be fine. And we're not talking about when he was super old here. We're talking about when he was in his early to mid 30s, and he would go through those periods, and people were like, oh no. And it's like, shut up, just stop it.
The greatest relief pitcher is still the worst person in the world.
Do you know about this, Spencer? Steve's opinions about relief pitchers are quite I don't know, troglodytic. Yeah. At one point he was saying they shouldn't have the right to vote.
Oh man, they are tough. They just make life tough.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is every relief pitcher, it's less true than it used to be, though, because it used to be that you could pretty reliably say a relief pitcher was just a failed starter. And that was sort of the thing. And that isn't really strictly true anymore. And
no, they've ruined baseball in another way. And coming out and just throwing 98 and then having some kind of breaking ball that nobody can catch up to, and you just got to throw it for an inning, and that's what's killed John Smoltz at this point.
It's slowly killing John Smoltz. Yeah, that is true.
Which I guess that's a check in their favor if they're going to kill off John Smoltz at some point.
Oh boy, I'd say we're going to get emails about that, but we won't. No.
I think John Smoltz listens to a podcast.
No, yeah, no.
He still has a flip phone.
Yeah. All right.
He's like, call me on my landline. Okay, Price Trozen. Joe Ross is looking nice from the pen. I think he's the go-to long reliever since the big fella, Bryce Wilson, can't seem to find his footing recently, even though he did today. We have to note, this was before...
he was...
The Sunday game in Cincinnati, which Wilson did a nice job. Would Ross be a playoff roster ad? Do you think he'd be on the playoffs roster, Spencer?
I think, as long as he keeps performing through September, I do think he will, because he is a better pitcher than Bryce Wilson. I'm pretty confident in that. And then I think he's the guy who's a little bit available to go a little bit longer, more than pretty much anyone else in that pen, maybe short of, if DL Hall ends up in the bullpen for the playoffs as well. But those would probably be the two guys who could give you like 3 or 4 innings if needed. So I think he ends up there, and I wouldn't say I've been super shocked that he's doing well in the pen, but even these results are probably better than I was expecting. So it's been good to see.
No, you called it. You take credit where credit is due here. I give it to you on Twitter too. You called this. You and Jack were both saying, I don't know who said it first, but you guys were both saying that Joe Ross seems like a guy who would really benefit from a move to the pen, because the 2 pitches, the sinker slider combo, was going to play up in the bullpen, and he wouldn't have to worry about facing guys that third time. And lo and behold, you have been proven 100% correct. And right now he's firmly inside my playoff roster, but we have more on that in a minute.
Okay. Jay Google asks, are we sure Miz and Yoho are up this year? Ross has been damn good out of the pen with an 0.69 ERA. Nice. What do you think, Ryan?
I'm not sure at all that they're going to be up, because with the emergence, not just of Ross, but also of Ashby, who's been a revelation, an absolute revelation. I want to get Spencer's opinion on that in just a minute too. There's just not going to be that much room. I mean, there's still room potentially on the playoff roster. We're going to get more into that in a minute, but there's still room. I just want to look real quick at what Joe Ross has done since moving to the bullpen, because it's been really outstanding. He has, over the course of, just waiting for this to pop up here, 13 innings out of the bullpen, 11 strikeouts, 3 walks, 8 hits, just the 1 earned run, a 0.69 ERA. So, he has been really damn good, and a guy that you just trust to, the one thing with Ross, you maybe do want to stay away from him against, if you can set it up this way, to stay away from the best power hitting lefties on the team. If you can avoid that, because there's some pretty big platoon splits with Ross, right, Spencer?
Yeah. Interestingly, it wasn't terrible the first time through as a starter too, which was part of the reason we were thinking it would be fine in the pen. But I still think if you can, you would like to avoid that. Yeah,
but Ashby, the velocity has just been, he was pumping 99s in his last 2 outings. And that is, and then when he would throw the breaking pitch, that thing was, it would start looking like it was in the center of the zone, and it would practically hit guys in the shoes. And you're just going, whoa, the stuff has just really, really played up. And it's so nice to see, because he's been through so much here. But I feel really good about both of those guys right now. We're going to have to see how they finish out, obviously, the last month. But both those guys look like people I wouldn't worry about pitching in a tight situation in the playoffs at all right now. Like if the playoffs started today, they would be in there for me, no problem.
Yeah. Ashby, like you said, it's more than anything else, it's very cool to see him doing well. He's been through so much the last couple of years. And just to give him props mentally, like to get through those struggles in AAA while your stuff is not where it used to be. You're coming off this rehab. I'm sure he's on social media. I'm sure he's seen plenty of stuff about how Brewers should get rid of him. His contract's terrible. All of this while trying to get back from a really major shoulder injury that's pretty rough on pitchers and can end careers. So for him to get back to this point and just be helpful at all is awesome to see. And he looks more than helpful right now, though. The stuff is really good. Watching this last appearance, I don't want to say this, but like that curveball looked like a Clayton Kershaw curveball at times with the way it was coming. Like that's how much it was moving and how much drop it had. And when you can land it in like the middle of the zone and buckle hitters' knees on the opposite side, like he had right-handed hitters just completely frozen on pitches that ended up middle. That's how much that thing is moving and how late it is and how sharp it is. Like he looks fantastic. And like you said, the velo being up back to around 97, 98 consistently and touching 99. He's going to have it's going to be hard to leave him off of a playoff roster if you get to that point, as long as command issues don't pop up or something in September, which will always be kind of the one thing that I could see happening down the stretch that could change things, but he's been fantastic.
Yeah, if he's healthy, I think there's a pretty overwhelming chance he's on the thing because he can also go multiple innings. This is part of the deal is being able to give you a couple innings is going to be a big deal for them in the postseason because they are going to want to run short starts with a lot of the starters they have. I don't think right now, we're going to see any of the starters unless they're way up in a game and it's just comfortable and it's cruising. I don't think we're going to see any of those guys a third time through the order. And there's just no reason to with the number of relievers that they have. That's not going to be a thing they need to even push.
Okay. Corey Diedrich's question. I want a yes or no answer from both of you. In your opinion, will Craig Yoho be up in the bullpen at any point this season? Ryan?
No.
Spencer?
Also no.
Okay. I figured we've talked about the rest of the bullpen enough.
Yeah, this is going to be driving you nuts. I'm terribly sorry,
it's fine.
Steve.
It's what the game's turned into. I have to admit that.
It is what the game has turned into.
It is. Okay, so taking all of this bullpen talk into account and understanding the Brewers will probably only go as far in October as their pen will carry them, if the postseason started today, who would be on your 13-man pitching staff, assuming 4 starters and 9 relievers? Spencer, do you have a roster sketched out yet?
I do. So rotation, I have Peralta, Ray, Myers, and I did go back and forth on this. I think it's just going to be whichever of Savali and Montas is having a better finish to the season in that 4th spot. But I did go with Montas right now. I could see it being Savali pretty easily, though. Pen-wise, I do think Ross makes it. I do think DL Hall makes it in the pen. Because he is a guy we've already seen. He's pitched in the playoffs for the Orioles in a bit of a leverage type role, but he can also be stretched out and go longer into a game if needed. Brian Hudson, I do have Ashby in there. I do have Koenig in there. So I'm already up to 4 lefties out of my 9 relievers, which is where this is kind of tough. I don't think they'll go beyond 4 lefties, but I do think there's a chance they will take all 4 of them. Devin Williams, Piamps, McGill, and then we didn't actually touch on him, but I said it's either Mears or Mizorowski. So I do think there's a chance we see Miz. I don't think we'll see Yoho. I do still think there's a pretty good chance we see Miz in September. And that might be at the cost of Bryce Wilson's roster spot, even though he did do well this last outing. He's pretty much only been used in garbage time for like 2 months now. And to me, that's not a guy worth carrying at this point in the season. And it might be the time to do it right now because he's probably not going to be available for like 4 days after pitching 4 innings today. So it wouldn't shock me if he's gone soon, unfortunately, after a really good outing for him. But I think Mears and Mizorowski have kind of similar stuff. If Mears comes back from his injury and he pitches well, he might make it, but I do think Miz has a chance at being that last guy. So that was my my breakdown. I kind of cheated because I gave 10, but I'm going half and half on Miz or Mears.
Yeah, it's really tough. I think the ones I feel pretty good about as of today, and obviously health and total collapse could change this, but the ones I feel pretty good about today are Williams, McGill, Piamps, Hudson, Koenig, Ross, and Ashby is where I'm at. And so that's 7 guys. And I had Savale in and I had Montas out because I just like that Savale has been pitching, missing bats much more than he was when he was initially here. So that's really good. The DL Hall thing does come into my mind. I didn't even have him written down because apparently I'm an idiot and I forgot about how good he was on Friday. But yeah, DL Hall is a guy that you could potentially see pitching out of the bullpen as well because he did a lot of that for the Orioles and there isn't really a rotation spot for him right now. I do wonder, is he currently back up? Did he come back up today?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
They might go 6-man in September. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and it would make sense because you want to keep him stretched out too. You need to maintain, because that was my reasoning for sending him back down. But there's also the bit about if they keep him up this year, I think from here on out, they don't burn the option. And so he would retain an option for next year, which could be really important depending on what's going on with him and the rest of the staff. How this team operates with options. But yeah, so beyond that 7, I've got like 8 guys written down here, any of whom I could see legitimately making that postseason roster. DL Hall, Mears, Milner, Peguero, and I think Milner and Peguero are probably out just because they've been surpassed. But like either one of them is better than a lot of relievers on a lot of playoff rosters are going to be out there. They're not terrible. And then Yoho, Miz, who I agree with you on that, like. That's going to be very interesting, especially because he can give you some length too. This is another guy who can give you length. And I think it's going to be sad, but yeah, I think it does make sense now to be the time that you'd let Bryce Wilson go. I wonder about if they would be hesitant to do that because of, is he a popular guy in the clubhouse? Do people like him? And he does good work. Like he's valuable. You need somebody to mop up, garbage innings, and you're not always the guy is sometimes going to be forced like he was today to pitch and leverage. And he did it well. Like he seems to be a guy who kind of has that ability to rise to an occasion that way. Cause he's done this before too, but the stuff just isn't that good. He's just not that good a pitcher and turning the page on that. I'm going to be so mad though when people celebrate, like this will really bug me the way it bugged me with Peguero when people celebrated him being sent out. It's like, no, he's been a really important, useful piece for them. He doesn't deserve the hatred that he gets. It's just, it's always whoever the bottom of the roster is always going to get more hate than they deserve. It's just how it works. But yeah, so it's really, really interesting what this team's going to do. But you look at it and you go, they literally could have 9 guys in the bullpen and you trust basically all of them pitching in a tight situation in a playoff game. That's just such a wealth of riches that it's hard. I think about it from my time period of being a fan of baseball in like the Doug Melvin era, and how we were just desperate to get like a second reliever, sometimes even like a good closer, like when Derek Turnbow or whoever was blowing, or John Axe or whoever was busy blowing up, you were just desperate to have a second reliable reliever, and now we've got like 10 of them. It's absolutely an embarrassment of riches. And that's really down to the team, what they do with the pitching lab more than anything.
Throbbing Yount asks, Jake Bauers now batting below 200 with what seems like a gazillion strikeouts. Is there a better option out there? He clearly didn't see Jake Bauers save Devin Williams' ass on Saturday night.
Yeah, it's funny because Jake Bauers is a guy that you could see him going all Cody Ross in the playoffs too. Like where all of a sudden he goes on a power bench and he hits like 4 or 5 dingers and there's your NLCS MVP or something. You could totally see that happening because that's baseball. That's what happens. But I really want to point out that first base is so bad. I want to ask you this, Steve. You haven't seen the number here. What do you suppose the WRC plus of first baseman is this year? So in terms of how they hit relative to the league average, What do you think the WRC plus of first base is this year in baseball?
I'm assuming since you're bringing it up that it's pretty like mediocre. So like, I don't know, 106.
You got to keep going. Lower, Spencer, do you know what it is?
No, I don't. But is it 98?
No, it is actually a little bit above average. How sad would it be if it was actually below average? It's 102. And yeah, so really first baseman this year. And you compare that to like what Jake Bauers is doing, which is he's around 90, I think. I don't have that page up. I'm on my iPad here, but like Jake Bauers is not actually that much worse than your average first baseman in baseball right now because of just the way the position has fallen off. They talked about this on both Effectively Wild this week and on Hang Up and Listen. Both of those this was brought up, and they talked about it, that it's been a long-standing trend. People were writing about this, like they said Verducci wrote about in like 2018. And I think that it does kind of color Brewers fans' perceptions on this. Everybody, the long-standing narrative is we haven't had a good first baseman since Prince Fielder, right? That was the last time we had like a true stud first baseman. But the reality is they've actually had, pretty cromulent first baseman a lot of the time in between. It's just that first base isn't the slugger who does nothing else but really hits the hell out of the ball position that it used to be. The game has just changed. And I think probably a big part of this is the expectations on defense are higher than it used to be. I think there used to be more of a thing where your first baseman was kind of a second DH or a DH for National League teams where you just put the biggest lumbering Hulk over there. I don't think it quite plays that way defensively anymore, does it?
No. I mean, the Brewers kind of had this year because they have played Rhys Hoskins at first a lot. So
That's true.
I guess you could argue they have gone that direction again. But yeah, for Bauers, I was decently high on Bauers, and Jack was very high on Bauers coming into the year. And both of us have started to get to that point where it's like, he's fine. And for this roster, he's okay, but it's probably a spot they will look to upgrade again this offseason. But you're not wrong that he's the type of guy who we saw him in whatever that was, May maybe, where he had like a 3-week stretch where he hit like 6 of his homers. Like he has that type of power where he could have a really good series in the playoffs and kind of flip some things. And the defense does matter. He's a much better defender than Rhys over there. It's nice to be able to put him in, even if it's end of games in the playoffs, and put him over there. That wouldn't be a bad thing. I would prefer, if they are both in the lineup, to never, ever see Rhys at first while Bauers DHs again. I have no idea why they've done that multiple times. But if they're both in the lineup, Bauers at first, Rhys DHing is a solid combination. And yeah, first base is not what it used to be offensively around the league. You still got a few. You got the Freddie Freemans of the world and guys like that. But it's more just some guys who have some pop and also can pick the ball over there and make some plays defensively, and they don't worry as much about the bat as they used to.
And it is interesting looking back at Prince's years. Like, overall, his WAR numbers were never great. Like, they were good, but he was never a 7+ WAR guy.
Oh, no, because his defense was just too bad to ever make that work.
Yeah, and, a lot of the issues with the Brewers in that era, where the pitching was relatively poor, like their defense wasn't good either. And we're kind of seeing what the difference is with, the current makeup of the team and the way the new front office runs things. Like, they outplay their run differential, or they outplay expectations in a way but it's true, in a way those teams could never do, because the pitching and the defense would never really allow it. And you can't just rely on outslugging teams.
No, I was laughing because this year they're actually 2 games behind their run differential.
Well,
or maybe even worse than that. It might be 3 now.
Well, that's because their offense is so good this year.
Yeah, though, honestly, they're people think it's the offense. The Brewers, offensively, I think last I looked, they were 7th in runs per game, which they've maybe improved a little on that since when I looked, but they're 2nd in runs allowed per game. Their pitching has actually been still better than their hitting this year, which is flabbergasting given the names that we have. But that's what depth will do for you, and defense. Depth and defense is what is doing that for them.
Yeah, I think these teams are a good example of the defense that was lacking in those years. Even though we had fun with those teams, like defensively, they were garbage, and that killed a lot of the season for them. So, okay, Price Trojan asks, I can't remember exactly who it was, but I remember how the Brewers would call up a little fast guy every September when the rosters expanded to pinch run. I wish they would do that with Dylan O'Ray, who has 60 stolen bases at Biloxi this year. Guys, do you want a Dylan O'Ray to come up and be their fast guy, or is there enough speed on this Brewers roster to just get by?
Yeah, they're fine in the speed department this year. It's not the same as it used to be, where there were a lot of lumbering when Travis Shaw was your second baseman and Moose was your third baseman, and really nobody was stealing too many bases on those rosters. It is funny. Quentin Berry was that guy one year for the Brewers, the first base coach now. But I will say I miss the expanded rosters in general all the way to 40. I thought it was a lot of fun. You got to see guys make their debuts that wouldn't have in the past. And for the Brewers, it just played into their depth even more. So it was perfect for a team like the Brewers because they have, like we talked about, they could have 14 relievers in their bullpen right now that you would be like, yeah, we could just put them out in any situation and feel okay with them and not have to worry about, building in rest nearly as much because it would be built in kind of organically with that much depth. But yeah, it was kind of fun. Those were the Terrence Gores and the Jared Dysons and those types of guys would always make a roster and then make the playoff roster to be that type of guy. So that was entertaining, but Dylan O'Ray, I don't think would have been making it up either way as a guy who they view as a somewhat legitimate prospect at 20 years old. I doubt they would have been bringing him up, putting him on the 40-man, starting his clock and doing all of that anyway. That was usually reserved for like a vet, like a Quentin Berry or a Terrence Gore, those types of guys. Yeah,
and good shout on the who's the other one from the 2015 Royals they mentioned? Gore.
Jared Dyson.
Oh, Jared Dyson. Yeah, Jared Dyson. Yeah, and frankly, that guy this year is probably, honestly, either Sal Frelick or Garrett Mitchell, whoever isn't hitting. So they'll use them off the bench as a pinch runner.
Though Mitchell's not a great base stealer.
He's not, but he's incredibly fast. He's like, he puts up 80 times in terms of running, so he's incredibly fast. But you're right, he's not a great base stealer for some reason. I'm not quite sure what it's just the instincts, or maybe he doesn't have the reps because he's always hurt, and so he just maybe doesn't have the raw number of reps doing that other people do.
Yeah, that's kind of my guess. He stole them pretty decently in the minors, and obviously these are better catchers, and pitchers are a little better at holding runners and stuff, but I think over time he will become a decent base stealer. I think it might just be a small sample of barely getting caught a few times too that makes it look like it's not very good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that'll do it for this week. Ryan, do we have new patrons you want to give a shout out to?
We do. I need to get on that page, though. Oh, so wrong page. Yes, we have brand new, though actually it might be a returner. Samuel Gill. I think welcome back, actually. I think this might be one of our seasonals for the football side of things. But yeah, welcome, Samuel. We appreciate it very, very much.
Yeah, and before we go, Spencer, you got anything you want to shout out this week?
No, I mean, we mentioned it a couple times during this, but check out the Brewer Fanatic podcast with Jack Stern and myself. Releases every Friday.
Ryan, anything else?
Nope. I don't write words on the internet. Well, I did on Twitter.
Nope. You're just waiting for the Cardinals to come to town?
Cardinals, I will be at the game on Monday. I found that out like an hour ago, right before we started recording it. He's like, oh, we have tickets for tomorrow. So yeah, I'll be at the Cardinals Brewers game tomorrow afternoon. So that hopefully will be fun.
Okay. Be nice to all the sad Cardinals fans.
Oh, that's not a thing I can do. I can ignore them. I can actually be nice and generous to them. That's expecting a little too much. These are the BFIB after all.
They will be moping around AmFam Field. So anyways, hey, everybody, hope you enjoy the Labor Day weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And hopefully Jaymes and Paul will be back next week.